Green.
Go green.
Ever had like a form?
Charles, can you turn your mic on, please? Turn your mic on.
Go green.
Good evening and welcome to the Town of Cicero Planning Board meeting, our first meeting of 2022. Where does the time go? I want to first start by introducing two new ad hoc members, Ashley Hogan and Jim Duvall. The town board added a second ad hoc, so now we have two. And I want to just acknowledge Mike Marizio for the awesome job he did last year. He's moved, I call it down to the town board. Mike, thanks for your service on the planning board. With that, would you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Duvall, would you lead us off? Thank you. So we've got to do the organizational stuff for our first meeting of 2022. But before I do that, I want to also thank the town board. We got Jonathan Karp in the audience and Nancy White is here. I was reappointed for another 5-year term as a planning board member and reappointed as the chair for 1 year. So thank you very much for that. It really is an honor to serve the town of Cicero, our home. And I want to thank my team. I mean, you guys make my job, our job, very easy. And I appreciate the job that you all do. With that, we'll jump into the organizational stuff. First item is the appointment of the planning board clerk, and I'll move for the adoption of a resolution appointing Cynthia Chamberlain as planning board clerk for the year 2022. We have a second?
Second.
Mr. Duvall,
Yes.
Mr. Abbey,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Cindy, thank you for all you do, for aggravating Mr. Snyder. Second one, I'll propose a resolution and I'll ask for somebody to make it a resolution. This is the appointment of the planning board engineer for 2022. We'll move for the adoption of a resolution appointing Mark Parrish of Rambo as planning board engineer for the year 2022. This motion also approves the planning board engineer's monthly retainer and authorizes the planning board chairman to execute the same if any written agreement is necessary. When somebody like to
So
make that
moved.
motion? Do we have a second? Mr. Duvall,
Yes.
Mr. Abbey,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes. By the way, Mark is home quarantine. He was exposed to somebody with the COVID virus, so that's why he's not here with us tonight. But Mark, if you're watching, congratulations. Next is the appointment of the planning board attorney for the year 2022. And this will be a motion to a resolution appointing Neil Germain of Germain & Germain LLP as planning board attorney for the year 2022. This motion also approves the planning board attorney's monthly retainer and also authorizes the planning board chairman to execute the same if any written agreement is necessary. Would somebody like to make that a motion?
Second.
Who made the motion?
No. You get to make the motion, Don. Second. So moved.
Mr. Duvall,
Yes.
Mr. Abbey,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes. And then the thank you, Neil. Establish the 2022 schedule for the planning board meetings. We'll make a motion to a resolution establishing the proposed schedule annexed hereto and made part hereof as Exhibit A, the schedule for the 2022 planning board meetings. All meetings shall take place at the Cicero Town Hall and will begin at 6:30 PM unless otherwise advertised. Would somebody like to make that a
So
motion?
moved.
We have a second? Second by Mr. Duvall. Mr. Duvall. You vote yes? Jim?
Yes.
Mr. Abbey?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Bloss?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And then lastly, I appoint the deputy chair, and I am very happy to say that Mr. Snyder has agreed to serve again as deputy chair. And he has accepted the appointment, correct, sir?
As long as I work as hard as last year.
That concludes our organizational information. So we'll move on with the normal agenda stuff. And we'll start by opening the meeting to public input. Is there anybody here that would like to speak to the board on any active application? Given nobody's come forward, we'll close the public input portion and move on to the proposed jujitsu and yoga studio at
Min-
5.
Minutes.
Oops. Got to approve the minutes first. Sorry about that. Everybody's had a chance to review the minutes from the December 15th meeting. Any questions or comments?
Who's to be approved as printed?
We have a second.
Second.
Mr. Duval,
Yes.
Mr. Abbey,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes, minutes have been approved. Now we'll move on to the jujitsu and yoga studio for the property at 5665 State Route 31. Mr. LaJudas, welcome back.
Once again, my name is Daryl LaJudas, and I'm here as the owner of 5665 State Route 31. Thank you for having me back. So since the last meeting that I was here, we've had a chance to review what you folks have suggested and said, and I believe that we've made the appropriate changes to the plans and have presented them to you. And we'd love to get your approval on this plan today, if possible.
I'll start out by mentioning, since Mark isn't here today, our engineer, I did want to chat with him about his review letter, and there were a couple of things on there that he would like to see. He's all right with us approving conditions as long as our attorney is, and he said yes. One of them is the cut sheet for the lights.
Yep, I have that with me
You have those
tonight.
with those?
Yep.
You have cut sheets? No. Okay, you'll have to provide those.
Okay,
They'll need to be approved by the engineer. The approval, assuming we get to that point tonight, will be conditioned on his approval of the cut sheets.
okay,
And then secondly, the sign location,
yep.
it needs to be spelled out on the blueprint,
Oh, okay,
dimension where it's going to be.
okay,
And so you may want to chat with Mr. Parrish, put that stuff together, get it over to him for his approval, and that will finalize, assuming we do a conditioned approval tonight.
okay, great.
With that, we'll open up the questions from the board. Mr. Duval? No questions? Mr. Abbey?
I'm all set, thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Now you remain as owner, so we don't need to worry about the property line, right? You're not selling the property.
That's correct. Yep.
Done.
Mr. Bloss?
I'm all set.
I'm all set as well. So, Steve?
I'm good, thank you.
Neil? You're all set. Would you propose a motion for approval with those two conditions, please?
First, you're gonna do your standard seeker motion.
Mr. Rosito's not here. What are we gonna do? I'll make a motion that we do the standard seeker.
Second.
Mr. Duval,
Yes.
Mr. Rosito. Mr. Abbey,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder.
Yes.
Mr. Bloss.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Now the approval, please.
Yes, you're gonna move for the adoption of a resolution approving the application known as Daryl LaJudas, 5665 State Route 31, proposed jujitsu and yoga studio. This approval is strictly conditioned on the following: one, the color schemes and renderings and or elevations as presented by the applicant to the planning board in regard to this application shall be incorporated by reference into this site plan and the board's approval thereof. Accordingly, the actual project must substantially conform to items as presented herein. Two, the proposed freestanding sign will be relocated so it meets the town code setback requirements. Three, lighting cut sheets have not been provided. The applicant will submit cut sheets for approval by the town engineer or codes office No permitting of any kind will be allowed before the cut sheets are approved as stated.
Somebody like to make the motion?
Make it as a motion?
Have a second?
Second.
Mr. Duval?
Yes.
Mr. Abbey?
yes,
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mr. Bloss?
Yes.
And I vote yes. All
Good.
set?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Good luck
Appreciate
with
your
it.
time. Thank you.
Good luck. Next item on the agenda is Eric Strope. This is for a proposed solar array at the property at 5867 State Route 31. Welcome back, sir.
Good evening. Thanks for seeing me again. I'm Eric Strope. I'm the owner of the property. I'm looking for the approval on the solar array. Last meeting, there was a few outstanding issues. Got confirmation. Project is classified as a tier 2. So a letter.
Speak a little closer to the
Oh,
mic.
I'm
please.
sorry.
Thank you. You can pick it up if you. hold it if you'd
And
like.
there was also, I received a letter from Mark Parrish, the town's consultant engineer, and he had several questions which I addressed, and I believe he forwarded on his, is it letter,
Review letter.
recommendation, review letter. With that, I'm asking for approval of the project. Or if you have any other further questions from me.
All right, we'll go through the board, see if there's any questions. Mr. Duval?
No.
Mr. Abbey?
just for information, are these fixed position panels or with the,
Chuck, can you speak in closer to the mic, please?
Yeah,
and I was wondering.
I
if
did
they're-
hear him. Did you want him to repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat it.
Okay.
I was curious if the panels are fixed or if they're mobile.
Yeah, they're single mounted. They're not mobile. They do not rotate with the sun. So they are fixed on a rack system, which doesn't rotate.
Okay.
Does not rotate.
And refresh my memory, it was what is the size of the area that these panels will be occupying?
It's linear, the length. It's a single row of panels. The total length, I believe, is right around 130 feet. They're continuous.
And
So
probably 15 feet wide or something to that effect.
You have the specs. They're not,
Okay.
yeah, they are landscaped. They're not 15 feet. I believe they're, quote me, the information that I provided has the specifics. But I think they're more like 7x5 or
Yeah.
I think it's more like 8x5. And I believe this project, it's going to be landscaped. So it's going to be 8 foot wide by 5 and there'd be a double row.
Okay.
Gets up to that about 10 feet high, or
Great.
it's actually a little bit more.
We always like to encourage landscaping, which you're ahead of us on.
Yep, I provided that. That was one of the outstanding conditions, and I already have a contract to be mowed, twice a month in the summer months.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
I'm good.
Mr. Bloss?
I'm all set.
Mrs. Hogan?
Yes, up on top where it says proposed solar array, that survey is a portion of the total survey, just to scale it out. But that whole area is perimeter chain link fence. Yep, there's already a perimeter chain link fencing around, not the whole property, but there's the whole property. If you see the line that goes vertical down at a pointer, there's actually a line on the survey on the northernmost boundary line, about 50%. That's where the perimeter chain link fencing goes down, and yes, that's chain link fence. And then the rest of the perimeter chain link fence is pretty much the property boundary. I'm not an electrical engineer. However, it is all, the power is all through the meter that's already there, just similar to the meter of their house. It's not a high voltage. It's typical voltage and it's tied directly into the meter and the main panel. There's not going to be a new thing directly into the main entrance of the building.
Thank you. There was some discussion last time about the language and whether or not building or buildings, but
Found that this actually does fit. One, box or whatever, just used for that one.
Steve, anything?
No, I would just add to the board that here, if he did, it's on board for special use.
All right, then I will move for the standard seeker. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Duval,
Yes.
Mr. Abbey,
Yes,
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes for the seeker. Neil, would you propose a motion for approval?
Yes, you're gonna move for the adoption of resolution approving the application known as Eric Scope 5867 State Route 31 proposed solar array. This approval is for elevations as presented by the applicant to the planning board in regard to this application to be incorporated by reference into the site plan and the approved board's approval thereof. Accordingly, the actual project must substantially be as presented herein. 2, the applicant is advised of the special use permit. This will be issued by the town.
So move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Duval,
Yes.
Mr. Abbey,
yes,
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes. You're all set?
So my next step is,
On board.
No, we've already got the agenda.
great, thank you.
Look. Next item is continued discussion with the PUD for the property at 8010 and 8016 Brewington Road. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Brian Bouchard with CHA Consulting, attending on behalf of the applicant and developer for this project. Tim Haskins unfortunately had an emergency this morning with his pet dog. He had to take him in for surgery. Wasn't able to travel, so he won't be here tonight, but he did text me just a minute ago and said that the surgery did go well. He is watching through the Zoom and is available by phone in case any questions come up. So this is for the Metro North PUD. I was prepared to just basically pick up where we left off, Mr. Chairman. You remember that there was basically one singular data point that you wanted us to kind of crunch in terms of the density. With the new board members, I'm not sure if it's more worthwhile for me to take a step back and further describe what we have been through in terms of the process and the more generic nature of the project, or if you want me just to go through the more recent data that we submitted and pick up where we left off with the last meeting.
I think the more recent data is fine.
Okay, so at our last meeting, this is obviously a residential planned community, within the Brewington Road corridor. It's an existing RC commercial district proposed for a zone change to plan unit development for the residential use that would be split into a variety of apartments, including multifamily apartments on one side of the project and also senior living apartments on the other side of the project. What we were asked to do is to take a look at the recent changes that we discussed at the last meeting, right? The original project had 400 units and included a lot more development on the easterlymost portions of the project within these green upland areas here. We revised that and reduced this project from 400 units to 300 units. And we also renegotiated with the seller of the land to acquire 2 more acres in this area that he was previously planning to retain as part of the auto dealership. So essentially what we did was we reduced the number of units. We added land mass to the project, and we also deleted a portion of what was previously a town right of way. So what this did was reduce our overall density, right? The number of units per acre of land is what the density calculation is. So what we were tasked with and what the chairman had asked us to do was take the number that was discussed in previous meetings and at the last meeting of a maximum of 250 units, which was kind of the maximum that the planning board had indicated would be feasible for the project, and figure out what the 2 acres and the additional land mass would add to that number, right? So with the 2 acres, and I've enumerated it here in my review letter, there's 2 acres of land as well as the previous town right-of-ways, which have been removed and added to the project. We have a land mass of just over 150,000 square feet. So what we did was we used the RM district's density calculation, which is approximately 5,400 square feet per unit, and came out with an additional 28 units that would be allowed. So if we take the 250, that was a comfortable number with the board, and add the 28 units, we have 278 units that would be feasible for the project in comparison to our 300. I went a little further to kind of show you the square footage calculations that were in the original approval or the original proposal of 400 units, which was about 2,800 square feet per unit. And by adding the land mass and by deleting 100 units from the project, we now have 300 residential units that would be composed of 150 multifamily on the south side of the project, which are apartments, townhomes, and garden style apartments. And then we have 150 senior apartments on the north side of the project that would be a second phase. And that bumps the density up to 4,177 square feet per unit. We did also talk about building height. The intent of the developer is to reduce all of the buildings within the senior portion. As we know, there's an existing residential neighborhood within Gray Avenue and Fairview here. So we reduced the height of those buildings and proposed them to be 3 stories. But we are still requesting that these 2 buildings within the center of the multifamily, which again are further away from the existing residential homes, and they would be surrounded by typical 2-story pitched roof garden style apartments and townhomes. They would be in the center. Those would still be 4 stories, and the reason is because they all have garages underneath them. So as we talked a little bit about this last time, where the first floor would be garages, and then the 3 floors above it would be those apartment units. So I believe with that information, we satisfied the requests that we kind of talked about, along with a more appropriate concept plan, because we kind of just had a sketch plan for you last time there with the highlights in it. So we've further developed the concept plan and are looking for this board's recommendation back to the development team in terms of your approval in principle or further modifications that you would like, so that we can use that letter as a tool for us to make a decision on how to move forward with the project.
Thank you. So we'll open it up to the board for questions. Mr. Duval?
Okay, so.
I know you're being thrown into, I mean, we've got hours and hours and hours of conversation.
Yeah,
after this project.
exactly. And I can go back as far as you need to feel like you're caught up to speed.
Okay,
So,
so you were originally at 400.
Correct.
You went down to 300
correct.
and now it's at 278.
No, we're still proposing 300. And what the
300.
conversation was prior to that was that when we were at 400 units, the board felt like the density was too excessive, right? So we were asked to take another look at it. And what we did was come back with 300 units. So we took 25% of the project away. And also purchased additional land, which spreads the project out a little bit and further reduces density. What was unclear is kind of the comparison that we've been doing between, because this is a zone change to plan unit development, we basically established the rules and regulations for the development itself, because it's a very specialized project. But we've been comparing it to the RM district, which is the only district in the town that allows multifamily, but it's also a little bit different of an area here because this is a more intense zoning as it exists today, right? It's regional commercial. So you could picture the Walmart to the north and the Wegmans to the south. So a development like that, which would be much more intense. So we're kind of trying to strike a balance between the intensity of the zoning that we're surrounded with, but adding a residential use to kind of limit things like traffic impacts and other things, because it's a lot different than a commercial use would be. So we're basically trying to compare other areas of the town that would allow apartments and what that density would look like compared to what we're requesting the board's approval and the town board's approval for a zone change for. So we are still requesting 300 units. By reducing it from 400 to 300, it's a substantial constriction of the project financially. And 300 units, as the developer stated last time, is what's required to make the project move forward. And the data that we presented, 278 units, is just a comparison of what the board felt like, 200 to 250 is what we were talking about. And the chairman asked us to use the 250 number and try and add in the area and see what that number comes up with. And basically what we're left with is the 278 versus what we're proposing is 300, which is fairly similar is what we're trying to demonstrate here, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'll second. Mr. Abbey?
A couple things. When you got down to this 278, the difference to do that would be to eliminate the garages. Is that true?
So the garages are not counted as units. So essentially removing any more units would remove apartments, right? Yes, not necessarily the
Oh,
garages.
that part was probably bearing
Height.
height.
Yeah,
right?
we were saying, right,
Four floors to
if the
three.
4 stories wouldn't be allowable, and one of the recommendations that we may get in your letter, hopefully, as a result of this meeting, we had talked about the difference between 4 stories and 3 stories, and the idea that, basically what would happen is we would just have to delete the garages to make it a 3-story building, which would push all that parking out into the parking field, which is a little bit less desirable, right? And again, the RC district that we are currently in, but proposing a zone change on, this district, if we came in with, a hotel project, would allow a 4-story, 60-foot tall hotel as a standalone building, for instance. So we're trying to compare it with where we are.
So at this point, just those 2 buildings on the south side for 4
Yes,
floors?
correct. So, and we had, in the previous iterations, submitted an architectural rendering of each one of the building styles. So just to, I guess, step back, there's the senior buildings, which are now going to be 3 stories. There's senior living buildings. There's a clubhouse. We've reduced those all to 3 stories. And there's a few townhomes here that kind of buffer, again, the residential. And these are all 2-story townhomes, pitched roof. They look very similar to a single family home. These are townhomes. Basically, these outside buildings are all 2-story buildings. There are a variety of townhomes and garden style apartments that are 2 floors. Everybody gets a garage, living space on the 1st floor, your bedrooms and whatnot on the 2nd floor. These 2 buildings in the center are the only 2 buildings that would be 4 stories. So it's kind of like we've created this, kind of step pattern to where you have the architectural style of a single family home, townhome on the outside, and in the center is the taller buildings. And these would have garages on the 1st floor for everybody with a center corridor, and then there would be an elevator and stairwells to get up to the units that are at the top. So yes, for height, we're talking about simply deleting the garages, but pushing that parking out to the surface, which obviously isn't desirable for the project, because right now everybody gets a garage and a driveway with their unit, right? It's a 1-to-1 ratio.
Being 4 stories, that was within the regulations of the town for height. Is that,
It's in the regulation for the town for height within this regional commercial district. 4 stories, 60 feet would be allowed, right? If this was, for instance, a commercial project with a hotel that's 4 stories, we would be allowed to do 4 stories, yes.
a couple of details I don't think we talked about before. Dumpsters, where are they located?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a few details that are left to be determined, right? I mean, I think what we're trying to get through right now is just the viability of the project. And we definitely owe you details like landscaping, site lighting, dumpster locations, all the utility information, grading and drainage. So there's a comprehensive detailed development plan that is truly the next step to this. The step that we are on is really the first step still, which is to present you with a conceptual plan and to get your feedback or conceptual approval or modifications within a written letter that can allow us to move forward with that detailed development plan. But there will be dumpster enclosures, and maintenance. There is a maintenance style building, right, with garage doors where they can park some of their maintenance equipment and stuff like that. That would service the facility as well. And all those details are forthcoming, but there'll be space for it. Yeah.
And like most places, the residents will be responsible for taking their trash to these
Yes.
receptacles.
Yes, the trash collection in terms of disposing it off site would be done by a private hauler because it is still considered a commercial project. But they would be responsible for emptying their own kitchen waste and bringing it out to either their garage bins that are rolled to the street or the dumpster enclosure. Yes.
And what's the plan or intention for mail delivery? How's that going to work?
That is a really good question that I can definitely find an answer for. I don't think it's per unit. I think maybe there's a mailroom in the clubhouse that you would stop and get your mail, or we can, sometimes some of the multifamily projects, we do have like a mail shed, almost like a 3-sided enclosure where there's mailboxes that the post office can deliver to. But that's something, maybe not completely related to the viability of the density and things we're talking about, but I will get an answer for you on that when we submit the detailed development plans for sure.
I was just curious, based on your sister development there in Utica area.
Yes, yep, and Tim would have the answer off the top of his head, so he's probably watching right now, writing down what the answer is, or he'll text me in a second and I'll have an answer.
Thank you. Just one other little detail. And like you say, it's kind of preliminary here, but there's one little area for dog.
Yeah, so
walking or-
each project is going to have a clubhouse. So the senior living, they will have their own clubhouse and amenity spaces, right? The multifamily, which is to the south, also has its own clubhouse. And once we get through the next step, there may be some shuffling around of what we have to do when we start looking at grading and drainage, right? There might be moving some of the buildings around, so the layout might change a little bit, but currently this is the clubhouse that's dedicated to the multifamily facility. So there'll be, a pool, there'll be fitness areas inside. There's a spot to work out and still have your kids in a playroom with glass walls that you can see. So there's a lot of details on the clubhouse and amenity, but there is outdoor amenities too, like sports courts, playgrounds, and spots to walk your dog. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. Mr. Snyder?
The 4-story units, garage on the first floor, does one apartment fill then the second, third, and fourth floor, or are there apartments on each floor?
Right, so this would be a center corridor on each floor. So it's very typical of an apartment building where I would go up to the second floor. My apartment's on the second floor, and that's where my apartment's located. It's on the second floor.
Okay.
If I have a third floor apartment, that's completely different than the townhomes and gardens, which are, I own a townhome, I have a garage, I pull in, there's living space, there's stairs to get up to the bedrooms. But the flats, as we call them, they are flat apartments. They're
Okay, so you indicated that there are 42 units in that building.
correct.
That would mean 11 apartments per floor.
Not necessarily, right? 11
Not
per floor.
necessarily?
Right, 11 per floor would be 33 with 3 floors of
3
apartment.
floors of apartments.
Okay,
So it's about, the 42 is 45, so it's about 15 per floor, right? 15,
Okay.
15, 15 is 45, but there's some common space in between for the elevators and whatnot too, I would think.
all right. We said last time, we originally were 200 to 250. The chairman said you could look at 250 plus the added 2 acres land, that was 28.
Correct.
That's 278. You went to 300, which is 22 units more than what we kind of instructed you to do. And I guess what I'm wondering about is 22 units doesn't just mean that you eliminate the garages. You could eliminate the number of apartments on the third floor.
Mhm.
And your number would be close to the 278 that we said, and the people would still have garages.
Sure, that's definitely an option, right? Our hope is that, the developer and I as his representative have, I think, been very clear that the reduction from 400 to 300 took a lot of time and effort, and in negotiating more land in to the project, and the 300 at this point is what makes the project whole. So we provided you the data that you asked for, but the project still is hopeful that we've showed you that 278 is kind of what we've been talking about for the calculations comparable to an RM, but that it's not very far off from the 300 that's required for the project. So
22 units is not very far off.
it's a lot closer than when we were talking about 400 units versus 200 units. So
Yeah, but we said 250. We actually said 200 initially, and we said
Right, yeah.
250
understood.
plus the additional that could go on the 2 acres, which was the 28, which is 278. and you still are saying you need 300.
Yeah.
So are you telling me that if we do approve 278 units, the project is dead?
So I don't think that we were left with supplying you with a project that met that requirement. We had talked about, let's see what that unit allowable would be in comparison to what we're requesting, which is 300. So that's the way that we've presented it to you tonight. Yep.
I'm done.
The boss.
I get a couple quick questions. Why did they decide to split this up into like senior housing and multifamily and the whole 9 yards?
Yeah,
Instead of
so-
just all senior housing.
Instead of all senior?
Yes.
I believe that's obviously based on the market and having the availability to create more of a community here instead of just one singular use. Having a variety of apartment styles in terms of the townhomes, the gardens, and the flats is going to attract young professionals as well as small families and people that need rentals still. But there is viability also to the senior living project. And this is almost an identical model to the sister project that we looked at in Utica, which is also a portion of senior and multifamily as well. So it's kind of their product that they like to offer, where they're not just offering, one unit type across all 300 units, right? Everything's broken down into different number of beds, different unit styles with the townhomes, gardens, and flats, and then offering senior living as well. So it's really just creating a variety, that it's not just one age base or one type of person that's going to be living here. It's creating more of a residential community that can use the commercial spaces around this in terms of the Wegmans and the Walmart and stuff like that. So it's basically just a variety to create that residential community instead of a singular use. Yeah.
If this project is approved, what would be the first building? What would be the first would it be senior housing or the other apartments?
No, so the intent is to split this into two phases. The multifamily project to the south would be the first phase. So this would all be constructed at the onset of the project. What this would allow us to do is to install the traffic signal that's required out at Route 11. It would create the access road down the center, and we would build everything that is south of that kind of dividing access road in the middle. And the reason for that is because it's much easier to lease and occupy the multifamily project and get that viable and stable and running, and then construct the senior apartments as a second phase, rather than constructing the senior living first. And as you can imagine, with the older and elderly folks, having all that disruption of constructing the other project to the south is just not the way that he wants to approach the project. So it would be the multifamily first. We would start with the main access road that comes up the middle. We would probably, simultaneously be constructing all the utilities and all the apartments for that project as one phase. So it wouldn't really be, one building before the other, but the multifamily would be first so that there's not as much disruption for the seniors once they move in.
I'm all set.
Mrs. Hogan?
That's fine. Sure. Correct. So we are proposing, and there's a zoomed out view somewhere that kind of shows, there it is. So there is a main entrance drive that is currently unsignalized that would become a signalized intersection. There would also be, we would like to install, and we have recommended through the DOT in our traffic study, a cross connection to allow the residential neighborhood to come out and use the traffic signal, but not necessarily the other way. So it's kind of a benefit for them because they currently have a lot of accidents at the unsignalized Lincoln Avenue intersection. And we would also be proposing to provide the town with a dedicated right-of-way that would provide cross access to Walmart to the north. This is currently feasible because their, pavement and their driveway is kind of right along that edge, if you can picture where Walmart is. So that is feasible to construct today. The one to the south would be essentially, built but reserved and dedicated to the town, but it would essentially be a dead end because Wide Waters owns a very large parcel of land behind the Wegmans that's undeveloped. So there's really no way to connect it now, but it would be there in the future for the ability for residents to be able to come out and use Wegmans or use Walmart, or even the traveling public to avoid going back out on the corridor to get between those as cross access, so. Correct. So New York State has actually done a lot of work over the last 5 years to connect the sidewalks all the way down to Bear Road along the corridor. And I believe they're doing maybe even another phase now. So we would have, this would be a fully walkable community. So we would have sidewalks throughout the entire development. Correct, in it. And we would also have. Sure. Yeah, right. So right, so there would be sidewalks to connect all of the units, and each one of the sidewalks would come down a sidewalk that would connect to the Brewington Road corridor, and we would provide sidewalks that go north and south to the cross-access locations too. And aside from that, there's also, since we removed the development, there used to be apartments back here as well, but that's now going to be remained as green space, and we'll be offering, a future town easement if there's ever going to be some plan for a parallel road back here, but there would be a series of walking trails and stuff that we can use that green space. Right, so our signal, because we would have to build it, would be pedestrian friendly as well, right? So there would be crosswalks and ped poles associated with that, and the sidewalks would connect to the existing sidewalks and have that interconnection with the pedestrian signal so that people could use the sidewalk and cross at the locations. And as you know, as you go further south toward Wegmans, there's push buttons, and I think you can almost go all the way up to even past Target now with full sidewalks that the state has put in with crosswalks too, so. Yeah, so, right. Right, so 400, even with the density that we had, it was very comparable to some of the other planned unit developments in the town, right? But we heard what. No, in fact, they're out more in more rural areas, so they're more dense, but they're in more rural areas, which is counterintuitive to providing what we're trying to do here, which is within the highly commercialized regional commercial district, providing a more dense project, which you would see is kind of the way that the world is going now, is to use less space and still provide a financially viable residential project, because obviously, 200 units, and as our developer stated, anything less than 300 really doesn't create a whole project and wouldn't exist, right? That's kind of where we ended up with the density calculation. Correct. 28. Yes. Yeah, these are 14, these are townhomes, they're each 14 each.
Thank you. So I'm going to get into density. Surprise?
No, that's what we're here for.
And you're right, you originally came in with 400 and we talked about going with RM type standards because this is an apartment complex that is allowable in RM. And then the planning board came up with some numbers around 200 to 250 max, right? and then you added the land. And then that's what I said, well, what if we take our max, the 250, and add the number of units that would be allowed in that additional acreage? And that gives us the 278,
Correct,
which was on our high end.
correct.
And, we certainly recognize financial feasibility for a project, but more importantly, by a lot, we have to take into consideration impact on the town and good planning, right? That's our priority as a planning board team.
Absolutely, yep.
And I recognize that the improvements that you're doing on Route 11 are going to be beneficial, but I also recognize that we already have a situation traffic-wise that is tests the patience of the travelers every day there. All the way down to when you get off 481 Circle Drive, and it's busy traffic area. So from my perspective, I'm going to want to see that 278 as a target. I'm not sure, are we putting together a letter tonight, or are you looking for the board's finals on that letter that's got to be prepared so that they can? Mhm.
Forward it to the finding of fact and the what which way the board is.
Can you do me a favor and just pull the mic up a little bit closer? We got people at home listening, and
If I have an idea of the, which way the board is going to lean on these issues, I can, suggest what we're going to pull the board on. Just get a straw vote, then I can put together a finding of facts for you. And that finding of facts would be voted on by the board, and then it would be transmitted to the applicant. And that would get us past the preliminary stages of this. The applicant would, at that point would, come back in with a more formalized and final plan, detailed plan, before there's any recommendation up to the town board. But we're still stuck at the initial stage. We got to get past that at some point, and the applicant's looking for direction. So
yeah, we should provide that.
if I had a head count or pull the board on, tell me if these aren't the issues. But one of the things that we've been talking about is the density and number of residential units shall not exceed 278 units. Is that what accurate and what the board is looking for? Now,
Everybody concurs?
Yes.
I saw everybody shake their head yes.
Okay, I didn't.
Right. And then we were also talking about structure should not exceed 3 stories. Is that the board's opinion?
From my perspective, they're going to be reducing units anyways, potentially, and maybe that would get it down to 3 stories, which is good. But from my perspective, I'm all right with the 4 stories with, putting the garage on the first floor and
Where it's currently proposed?
where it's currently proposed. Yeah, they eliminated the 2 other buildings, I think it was.
Yeah, and so maybe part of that, not to add to it, but would be very specific to what we're requesting, just those 2 flat buildings, right? Not a blanket 4-story across the whole
No, just the
project.
2
but-
buildings.
We'll get that when you get the more finalized plan, but for now, we're doing a finding of fact. We're trying to give direction. So I think what I'm hearing is no structure is going to exceed 3 stories. However, 4 stories will be allowed in the currently proposed buildings where there's a first floor garage. Does that accurately reflect the board's opinion of that?
Say that again?
No structure shall exceed 3 stories. However, 4 stories will be allowed in the currently proposed buildings where the first floors shall be a garage. So in other words, you can't have more than 3 stories except in the buildings that they're currently proposing, as long as the first floor is a garage. I think we're either leaning to that or we're leaning to 3 stories and that's it.
Mr. Snyder?
I guess I'm a little perplexed in that we made it quite clear, and yet you still come back with different than what we indicated to you that we would approve. I guess I would be willing to vote for the project if the numbers or units were what we said, and if only those two buildings were 4 stories high.
Understood.
I agree. You're getting nods.
Take that as a yes. All right.
We're not doing formal votes, right? This is a straw poll.
Well,
Not
I'm
yet.
gonna straw poll, but then I'm gonna give you a.
Okay.
I have to know what to do in a proposed finding. Otherwise, we'll do 50 proposed findings and, you know, it won't reflect what you guys are, what the board. Now, those were the two main issues. Is there any other issue that you would want to address in a finding? Cognizant of the fact that they're gonna come back after the finding with a more refined plan anyway.
There was some discussion. I don't know if we need this in this letter or not, but the
The road?
road.
Okay, one of the things that was talked about was the entrance road and to the cross street, I believe was gonna be public and built to town standards. Was that what we were?
Yeah, and the easement along the back for a future parallel road if that ever happens.
Didn't we also say that the road that would go towards Wegmans, that kind of splits this project from Lincoln Ave project, that would be built to standard and would be actually both of them, if they're eventually going to be part of the connection, those should be town roads and should be built to our standard.
Correct.
So the town would be responsible for plowing, and that would mean you'd have a hammerhead or something at the end going towards Wegmans. And I don't understand why we have the curve at the end. I was gonna try to look at that today and I couldn't.
I
I
actually don't either.
mean,
We're providing it for, and I mean, this is gonna disrupt the apple cart for what you're trying to do for the findings. I think the best, and we can show this to you on an aerial at a future date. I think the best point to cross access is a straight connection
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
You basically end up in the side of the Walmart building with a left or a right turn, right? You can go left to very easily go to the front of the store, and you could potentially go right if there is anything ever developed out back. There was some suggestion by Kate, the town's engineer, and some discussion about trying to bring this access road so that it lines up with the rear. But to me, now you're discharging people basically to the loading docks, and I think that makes a little less sense because then if you want to go to the front of the store, you're going to have to take this, chicane left and right, and then take another left, and you're going to end up just coming across here anyway.
Right.
We left it there because it's available and either or option. But the point is, I think we'll get a little more detail into that when we provide you the next set of plans. But the intent is to have this access drive dedicated to the town and to provide the town with a subdivision map that shows this 60-foot wide right of way being built to town specs as well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about, to sum that up quickly, is the entrance road and cross streets will be built to the town standards with easements as may be required by the town and all roads constructed to towns.
Mhm.
Then I think the next one was, we talked about car spaces. I don't know if we want to get into that for your findings or not. One of the things that was talked about was 2 car spaces for every residential dwelling. Garages shall not count if they are separate rental. That was something we talked about. That doesn't have to be in your finding. That can be, you can address that as you go through the process. Something important to you that you want to let the applicant know about now.
Well, we did say that we wanted for every normal residential, we wanted 2 car spaces for that. And we said that we weren't sure we could agree with a 1.5 for the seniors. I live in a building with a lot of people. It's not a senior building. But most people have 2 cars. And when I go by the senior center, the senior building that's near the library, count cars, there's an awful lot of cars in that parking lot. So I'm not sure that's something we have to put in this thing, but we could put minimums, Mr. Chairman, if that's.
2
That
car
would-
spaces for every residential dwelling. that what we're talking about?
So our intent is to
Just-
provide,
just Why don't you let me
Okay,
just
yep.
get a grip on what we're gonna put.
That is what we're talking about, but this one's a little bit unique in that they require in the lease that the garages are used for parking
If you
spots.
want to address that down the line and the more, and not leave it and put it in your tonight's findings that will be transmitted to the applicant.
Yeah, or if we just throw something in there that makes it known that that's an issue that has to be addressed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
This is why we have a lawyer as on staff for us.
So
Very
what I'm
important.
hearing for that is the board has considered parking requirements. I believe 2-car spots for every residential unit would be a reasonable standard. Standard meaning they could deviate from it if
Perfect.
convince you otherwise.
Yep.
I think that is the end of the main items.
I think you're right. Anybody else think of anything else? I do have a question on behalf of the applicant. So assuming they want to move forward and they do a full site plan with us, then we make a recommendation to the town board and then it goes in front of the town board. Is there any way for the applicant to have like an informal meeting with the town board once we're done with this letter, just to get a feel from them, or?
The process, is works like this, according to statute. I mean, I don't know if the town board would entertain it. I don't know what difference. It would make. Right now, you're at the preliminary stage where we look it over and then we get back to the applicant with our comments or findings, and they're either yes with, certain conditions, or no, right? No is basically keep going back and refining it until you get to the preliminary stage that you could accept. Then, at that point, they're gonna come back to you with, they're gonna get your findings, address them, and come back to you with a more detailed plan, basically site plan. Then it will go up to the town after, with either a recommendation to approve it, disapprove it, or approve it with modification.
Yeah, so my question is based on them going through all of that. It's a lot of energy and effort in dollars.
Right.
And then we make a recommendation, but the final approval or disapproval is the town board.
Right, so if they wanna solicit opinions of town board members, meet with the town board members, it would be up to the town board members or them.
Okay.
That they're free to do it.
Yeah.
But, I can't speak for the town board,
Right, I understand.
but they could seek that opinion.
Okay.
Nothing prevent them from getting more.
So are you gonna do the letter now?
I will give you a proposed finding.
Any other questions or comments from anybody?
That one.
Go ahead.
On the prints and everything that you supplied to us, I noticed we've got 2 culverts going from to get to the crosses of proposed culverts for the wetlands. Now, would those should be in the final plans?
yeah, so 2 things about that. We do have permitted wetland crossings. We have a permit with the
Yes.
Army Corps of Engineer to cross in the narrowest location here. That was applied for as part of the redevelopment project that we worked on behalf of Sun Auto Group, which is now Echo Park, and then the other one here.
Yes.
Currently, you'll notice that we have deleted all of that development on the other side. So
Yeah.
I think I owe my applicant a little bit of time to figure out what we'll do with that, right? There's a permit standing in place. We want to make access to it for walking trails. We probably may do something less intrusive than a roadway, right? Something like a boardwalk or something to get over there and keep it mowed and stuff like that. But it is permitted right now. It's just, we don't really have a need for it if there's no apartments or parking over there.
I just want to make sure that down the road, if something is to be built or developed over there, parks or what, that the town of Cicero doesn't get stuck with putting those culverts in.
No, that would all be on the private side. You're right. That would be on the private property.
Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm going to read a formal findings and conclusions for your vote. Okay, so Town of Cicero Planning Board findings and conclusions of fact. Applicant is Gaberly Development LLC. The type of action is a zone change from regional commercial district to plan unit development district, 8016 Brewington Road. The applicant is seeking a zone change from regional commercial RC to plan unit development for property located at 8010 and 8016 Brewington Road. The applicant is proposing a residential development on the site, mixed use. The town of Cicero is cognizant of the scope of the Town of Cicero Planning Board is cognizant of the scope of this proposed project and has undertaken an extensive review of the potential impacts of the proposed development. Town of Cicero Planning Board has reviewed all the materials submitted by the applicant, its consulting engineer, the submitted environmental assessment form, the traffic impact assessments provided by the applicant, as well as additional documentation. Town of Cicero Planning Board, after review of the application, as well as review of all the comments and concerns brought to the board's attention and the mitigations offered by the applicant and the proposed project modification, hereby finds the following in regard to the proposed action. Findings: 1, the density or number of residential units allowed should not exceed 278 residential units. 2, no structure should exceed 3 stories. However, 4 stories shall be allowed in the currently proposed buildings, where the first floor shall be a garage. 3, the entrance road to the cross streets will be public and built to town standards with easements as may be required by the town. All roads will be constructed to town standards. 4, board has considered parking requirements and believes that 2 car spaces for every residential dwelling would be reasonable standard. These findings shall be reduced to writing and delivered to the applicant.
So move.
Second.
Mr. Duval,
Yes, with the conditions.
Mr. Abbey,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Bloss,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Thank you very much. So obviously we'll wait for the letter and then I'll have a chance to catch up with my client and hopefully we'll be putting together a site plan, more detailed development plan to move on to the next steps. So,
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
very much.
Thank you. That concludes our agenda items. Is there any discussion? Anybody have any comments or questions? We have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second,
I'll second.
meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
You survived, Jim. No big deal, right?
Yeah, that wasn't so bad.
One of the things that